Hi everybody and welcome to another author interview at Inhouse Publishing, and joining me today is Sandi Gamble. Hello Sandi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very good, and today we're talking about your book Broken, which I'm going to warn you guys, you might hear some things that are a bit rough to hear, but it's part of why we publish, is to tell our stories and to see change happen. So Sandi, I'll let you be the one to tell us, what is this book all about?
Okay, Broken is a very raw and emotional journey of a little girl who overcame a lot of obstacles in her life to end up surviving and thriving, basically. It is a raw conversational piece of Australian history. It was a story that had to be told. It ended up being the soundtrack of my life. There's a lot of music involved in it because I was very highly attracted to music as a child. It pretty much got me through some pretty tough times. It's also a story of survival. It's a story of not only my survival, but the survival of 500,000 other children in Australia, known to be forgotten Australians by the Australian government. I think it shines a light on a lot of issues that happened in Australia's history that they prefer to bury.
And let's go into that, because you are this little girl.
I am this little girl, yes.
The story is your story, and what is it? What is a forgotten Australian? To those that don't know. Okay,
a forgotten Australian is a child that spent time in an institution in in the 1900s, so pretty much from 1901 through to about 1975. They were children in care. They were put into care by the courts, by their parents, by the police. It was the largest amount of children in the world to ever be institutionalised, and a lot of these kids did nothing wrong. They were just put there for basically to be cared for by government institutions, private institutions run by like Salvation Army, Catholic Church, Baptists. There's a whole range of religious orders that got involved in looking after children, but they were far from looked after in these institutions. They were physically and emotionally abused.
Before we go there, why were you there? Why were you in the institution?
Okay, I was put into the convent because I was classed, or my mother classed me as a naughty child. I was basically looking after myself from the age of 6 when my father left my mother. My mother went down in a heap and she just couldn't look after me in the way that she should have. She was not mentally capable of looking after me. She'd had a nervous breakdown. She hadn't received any help for that nervous breakdown. And over a period of time, between about the age of 6 to the age of 12, I was left pretty much to my own resources. Yeah, my mum was not home. She was not there to feed me. She was not there to look after me. She was just not there. And of course I was left to the detriment of myself.
Where was she?
Okay, my mother started to drink actually before my father left, and it became a part of her life. So Mum was out there looking for companionship. All she had was a kid at home, you know, and she wanted adult companionship. She wanted somebody to talk to, somebody to offload to, somebody that would listen, and maybe even somebody that would just love her, because she'd been hurt quite badly. And so Mum was at the pub pretty much. She worked in the mornings and then she went to the hotel. She came home about 11 o'clock at night and she started the whole process again.
Did she hurt you?
My mum never hurt me, no. She didn't actually physically hurt me. Emotionally, mentally, yes, she did. Psychologically, wow, yeah, many scars. But my mum would drag me out of bed constantly all night when she got home. She would sit there drinking for hours and she would pull me out of bed and she would want me to tell her about how I hated my father. She would put other members of my family down consistently people that I loved and that meant a lot to me. And I'd go back to bed and I'd get pulled out of bed again. And this process just happened over and over. And it happened right up until I was 16 years of age.
What happened then? Let's fast forward to the time when the decision, was it your mum's decision to put you into the convent?
I don't think it was my mother's decision in actual fact. I think the decision was my auntie, more so than my mother. I actually got expelled from school, and it was because I was a truant. I didn't go to school. Nobody was there to make me go, so I didn't go. It was more fun to stay at home. And I decided pretty much one day that I was going to go to school. You know, if I was to have a future, I really just needed myself to push myself to do it. And anyway, I went to school, and about a week later my mum got sick, so I asked if I could go home and look after her, and we did, or I did. And when I got home, I gave her food. It was the first day she'd ever stayed home in bed sick, so it actually was quite worrying for me as a child. And on the way back to school I went the wrong way because I wanted to see my friends, but I fully intended to go back to school. And I was picked up by the police. So when I got back to school the next day, I was expelled because they'd seen me go past the school in a police car in my school uniform. And the expulsion was what put me into the convent.
Okay, let's go into that now. Now, you're in the convent. This was the beginning of the journey to be a forgotten Australian.
Yes.
What happened there?
Oh, what didn't happen there? I was put into a Magdalene asylum, or it was known as a Magdalene asylum, for 16 years and older. They were only registered for that age group, and I was 12 years old when I entered. There were other children there that were 11. It was run by the Catholic Church. It was a Good Shepherd convent. There's 8 of them in Australia, or there was 8 of them in Australia, and each of them had a laundry attached to it, which was classed as a Magdalene laundry. They had run them in Ireland for many years, and pretty much in Ireland it was older girls that had gotten pregnant or were in trouble, and they were put in there. But in Australia they just took all the children because the government paid for children to go into these institutions. And we were worked from morning to night.
What?
We were worked in the laundry. If we weren't in the laundry, we were scrubbing out on our hands and knees. Everything, windows, brass, cleaning nuns' rooms, you name it, it was done by the children that were actually in that convent. And we were beaten. Yes, and we were mistreated. We were psychologically abused.
Was there any reasons for what was? Did they try and justify their actions?
We were bad children.
Right.
We were the devil's spawn, was what one nun used to call us, and we were often told nobody wanted us, nobody loved us. That's why we were there. And in my particular instance, the convent that I was in Bendigo. I was told the doors were kept locked so that the good people of Bendigo could be protected from people like me. And I was like 12 years old.
Smart. What was your most, I know this is a difficult question to ask, but we've got to give people an insight into the book. What was your worst experience that you had at Magdalene?
The worst experience I had, and I have written about it in the book, was when I was taken to the hospital by Mother Rita and given a physical because it was found out that I had gonorrhea, and this was from being sexually abused from a very early age by a lot of men.
Prior to you entering?
Prior to entering the convent. And when I finished the internal examination, which Mother Rita sat at the end of the bed and watched the whole thing, which was quite disturbing, I was taken back to the convent. And when I got back to the convent, I was dragged by my ponytail all the way from the front door right across the courtyard to her office. And she snipped my ponytail off and she told me, "Now you're ugly, no man will ever want you." And anyway, I was sent to the dormitory and I wasn't to leave the dormitory. I was brought a bucket, which I was to bathe in, and separate towels, which I was to use, and she gave me injections every day. But I think probably the worst part of the whole thing...
Let's just go back a minute.
Yep, sorry.
No, don't apologise, believe me. She gave you injections.
I had to have injections 3 times a day.
For the treatment of the gonorrhea?
For the treatment of the gonorrhea for 3 months.
Okay.
And she was the one that gave me the injections.
Right. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit. How old were you when you got out of Magdalene?
I was 16.
16, and what was the reasons for release?
The government stopped paying any money towards children in institutions in 1973. So therefore, they didn't want us anymore.
There's a reason why I've suddenly gone quiet. I'm surprised by the actions of the government, intensely surprised. Let's go back to the word asylum, Magdalene Asylum.
I know.
The word asylum represents that you have a mental illness.
Incapacity.
Yeah.
And the files of a lot of girls, the girls that were in the convent with me, who I've been able to find a few of because of my book, which has been great, have had quite shocking remarks made about them by the nuns at the time. They are getting those files given to them by the government because they're requesting them, but they're looking and it's saying, and these are girls I grew up with, and I know they were healthy, normal, everyday girls, and it says this girl shows signs of retardation.
Oh my God.
You know, and it's not just once, it's constant. And the reason we have found out since then is they were paid more for people who were mentally classified in those days as mentally retarded. I know that that's very politically incorrect now, but that was the wording used back then.
I think, especially in the midst of this interview, being politically correct is not going to be the case. Sandy, you and I are all good. Okay, you turned 16, you're released because the government seemed to not want to take any ownership over the children of this great country.
Closing the convents down because of that.
Okay, right. So what happened to you?
I went home. My very first night at home, I had a huge argument with my mother because she wanted me to constantly get out of bed and run everybody down, and she was drunk, and I said no, enough, because I've got a life that I've got to move ahead with. I've got to get a job, and I just can't do this anymore.
Had she come in and seen you when you were in the institution?
She was allowed to come and see me once a month, and she did.
Right.
The nuns didn't like them to come any more than that. They said it disturbed us.
How was that for you when your mum came in to see you once a month for 4 years?
Yeah.
So how was that for you?
I actually liked seeing her. Her visits were great, you know. She wasn't drunk or drinking on those times, and we got along quite well during those visits, yeah.
I've worked with you for a little while now, and we've been, like, you've published this book prior to you and I meeting, and then we're republishing again now. And we've got a massive journey heading into the new year, and on we go.
And onwards, yes.
And in my time working with you, I've done a fair bit of research, and I've read a lot of the comments about you and about the book, and you know, the resilience, how brave you are. Those sort of comments just seem to be rattling out of your social media. Your Amazon has been absolutely mind-blowing, the results, and you haven't even done anything with that. It's just been putting it up on Amazon, it's been going gangbusters. Let's look at this life now, without going to right throughout the rest of your teenage years, but when you left home and you started actually building your life to where you're at now, it's been a constant journey through
terror.
Tell me about
absolute terror. I was a typical latchkey kid with an institutionalised mentality. I had no skills, I had no social skills, I had no living skills. We weren't taught how to do things at the convent. We were taught to clean and how to work in a laundry effectively. I had very little education. I had to basically start from there, but I also had a big target on my forehead, because I was also a victim, and I was in victim mentality. And of course I was ready for anybody that was going to show me an ounce of love to take me and do whatever they wanted to me. I was pliable at that point.
Which led to?
Which led to me meeting my first husband, who was a drunk, or not even drunk, that's not the word for him. He was a violent alcoholic with a schizophrenic personality disorder.
Wow. How long were you there?
I was with him for 6 years, and I had 2 children to him. And I was beaten morning, and I was beaten noon, and I was beaten night. I was thrown downstairs pregnant. I was beaten inside the hospital room when I was admitted to hospital with complications for the pregnancy.
So I presume you left?
I did leave. I had the last night, well no, sorry, it wasn't the last night that I was with him, but about 3 weeks before I actually left him, I came home from an outing that I'd taken, which I really couldn't see was such a bad outing, but anyway, I'd taken an outing. I wasn't allowed out of the house. He was very controlling. And my mum had been there to babysit the children while in my absence. And Mum told me not to come home. When I rang, she said, please don't come home because he'll kill you. And I sort of thought, no, I've got to go home because I've got to protect her. And we were starting to mend our relationship a little bit at that stage. So I went home, sorry.
Right.
And as soon as I got in the door, I walked in the door, my mum jumped out of the seat and she screamed, run. And I ran because I didn't know what else to do. And he came straight out of the chair he was sitting in. He was drunk, screaming after me, chased me up the road and beat me to within an inch of my life in the middle of Plenty Road in Melbourne, on the tram tracks. So it was right in the middle of the road, and he left me laying there.
Did anyone see? Was anyone there?
My mum was standing by the side of the road watching it and screaming at him to stop, but she jumped there's a little phone box there, and she jumped into the phone box and called the police and said to them, you need to come because he's beating her to death. And they said, I'm sorry, we can't do anything. It's a domestic violence situation between husband and wife.
And back then, and back in New Zealand, I recall that used to be the system. Thank God it's not now.
Yeah.
So you got out of this. Obviously, that was the clincher. That what happened next? Where did your life go after that?
Well, I left and I moved into a very derelict home, which a real estate was really willing to give me. I had no money. I had nothing. So yeah, I was really lucky to come across that particular house, and the Hells Angels had just vacated that premises. So there was grease all over the floor and there was holes in the walls, and yeah, and he said to me, look, I'll give it to you because I don't know whether they'll come back. So, just beware that they might. So I lived in that house, and I lived in that for quite some time until Jack found me and they burnt the house down. I moved to Sydney, and let's just say, my life was anything but amazing in Sydney. I met a lot of people up there. It was great fun, and my carefree way of life was pretty cool. And then I had an accident, and it was one of the changing points in my life where I had to sit in a hospital bed for 6 months because I'd broken both legs, my arm, I had head injuries, internal injuries, and I really wasn't well enough to go anywhere. I couldn't walk, I couldn't get on crutches, so 6 months I sat in a bed. And I had to think about where my life was heading and the people that I was hanging around and what my possible future was if I stayed in that situation. And it wasn't good. It wasn't even a good outcome. So I did go back to Sydney for a few weeks, and it wasn't the same. It was never going to be the same because I'd changed inside. I was a different person. I had a new perspective on what I wanted, and the life that I'd left behind prior to the accident was not the life that I wanted in the future.
What was the accident?
I had hitchhiked to Melbourne to see my children with 2 other girls, and the semi-trailer that I was in had a head-on collision with another semi-trailer on the Hume Highway at Sylvia's Cutting. And I'm lucky to be here. really.
Very.
Yeah.
There's obviously
We all survived, but I'm lucky to be here.
There's obviously a greater plan at place here, which I'm
Mhm.
sure you're aware that there is. Otherwise,
Yes.
how can one person go through a journey like this and
Yeah.
come out the side you have? So, after Sydney, you obviously...
Went back to Melbourne.
Yep.
And I would have been about 2 months later, I met Sean.
Now, Sean. Okay.
Sean's my amazing man, the light of my life, my rock, everything. He's my world.
He is a very genuine guy. A lot of time and respect for him. Very intelligent man, and definitely loves you to bits. You can see that every
Yes.
time I see this guy. You can tell that you're his world.
Yeah.
So what's life like now? You've come out of all this. You are with someone that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How is things? How are things?
I will say that he has the patience of a saint. That's one of the things that you left out. He took on a wreck. I was damaged in more ways than one. I couldn't walk. I had
You were
many.
broken.
I was very broken, yes, and I had many injuries from the accident that we had to go through operation after operation for. I was mentally damaged from my childhood, from the convent, from the men that I had been with. Emotionally and physically damaged. Well, yeah, that's just part of the course for the whole kit and caboodle, but he took me and very, very slowly helped me to put myself back together bit by bit. He was patient, he was kind, he was loving, compassionate. All of the things that a person that was in my situation needed, but he was also very young.
He was obviously very genuine.
He is, definitely.
And authentic. And now the two of you are about to embark on an amazing journey together, not only travelling around this country, but talking about the book. And what's it like now when you seem pretty relaxed right now, having a chat to me.
Yeah.
But when you're standing up in front of an audience and you're talking about the story, what's that like for you? Is it hard? Is it?
No, it seems to be really easy, actually. I don't know. I'm very passionate, I suppose, about the reasons why I wrote the book, and I want to get my story out there. I want to tell it. There's people out there that need to hear it.
What's your message to the other forgotten Australians?
You can survive and thrive. You just, and it's not you. You don't have to get over it, because you never will get over it. It's going to stay there. It's going to be inbuilt in you for the rest of your life. But you can put it aside for a bit and move on, and then when it comes up again, you can stop and deal with it, but you still move on, Yeah, it's the only way that you can actually deal with it.
Look, you guys need to get a copy of this book. I'm telling you now, you'll be hurt and sad at some points, and you'll be inspired and motivated, and all you'll want to do is you want to meet this wonderful woman and discover her secret of her resilience and how she found herself again. Sandi, I want to thank you so much for sharing this with me and coming in today and talking about this. It's been hard to hear, but it's been good.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, Sandi's website's at the bottom of the page. Go and check it out. Broken. Not so much anymore.